Well, it's cold and snowing outside, as it should be on Christmas Day. But we're all snug in here, announced Tommy's mother. Tommy winced as she opened the door to show them all the blizzard raging outside. Tommy willed himself to get up and walk through the door and go anywhere but here. As usual, his legs refused to obey. Hot chocolate, his mother smiled, especially for Christmas. Tommy's stomach turned over at the sight of the curdled, milky drink, but he knew that what came later was much worse. An interlude of boredom loomed, wherein Tommy unwrapped his Christmas presents, staring for the 100th time at the same book and the same DVD. Why hadn't anyone had the foresight to buy him some food? The chocolates he was able to eat each day did nothing to alleviate his hunger. He had lost quite a bit of weight on this diet. In the background, the radio churned out the same old Christmas songs, which were beginning to drive Tommy crazy. Then the finale of the day, the big meal, none of which Tommy could eat anymore, and which he had tried on numerous occasions to avoid. But he found himself, as ever, sitting between his brother and sister at the gaily decorated table as his father triumphantly carried out the huge turkey. The smell was horrendous, between the turkey and the rotting vegetables. As the platter was lowered, hundreds of maggots fell onto the table, wriggling. Tommy closed his eyes and wished as hard as he could, but his original Christmas wish appeared binding. As Tommy began to cry again, the radio started playing. Well, I wish it could be Christmas every day. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I've always known he was just made up. Someone parents told their kids about just so they would behave during the holidays. Nevertheless, I was always grateful for the double gifts. One from my parents, one from Santa, and would wake up every Christmas morning with a gold and silver wrapped present at the foot of my bed tagged, "From Santa." This went on all the way through my high school years, and though by that time I started to feel this was highly unnecessary, I continued to play along. It was just my parents' way of spoiling me, as I was their only child. However, it had to stop eventually, and I soon had to leave for college. Christmas came while I was a busy college freshman, but I couldn't help wanting to visit home before the season was over. As I was traveling, however, I received a call from our neighbors, telling me to come home immediately. I told them I was on my way, but was by then less merry and more anxious. As soon as I arrived home, I dropped my bags onto the snow and pushed past the policeman into my house. There, in the wreckage of the living room, lay the bloody and mangled bodies of my beloved parents. On the walls, in what looked to be written in blood, were the words, "Where is she?" Before the policeman pulled me away, however, I noticed a single, untouched gift in gold and silver wrapping under the Christmas tree. I don't believe in Santa Claus, but I do believe in monsters. This was in 1996. It must have been 3 or 4 in the morning. I heard something on the roof, a thunk, the jangling sleigh bells, the slow plodding of footsteps toward the chimney. Quickly I ran downstairs, careful not to wake my parents. Then I waited by the cookies and milk, hiding behind the couch. The jangling grew louder, echoing down the chimney. Thuds, scrapes, wind whistled. Dark soot fell and clicked off the cold coals. I remember looking down and seeing how hard my little fingers gripped the top of the couch. The creak of the leather, the whites of my knuckles. It's all stayed with me. I jumped as a black boot slipped out from the chimney and kicked up dust. The red of his suit was frayed, like the hem of a castaway's pants. The color faded to a soft pink. Not like the mall Santa at all. The other boot fell. This one had a manacle crimped around it, so tight it had chopped through the boot and bit into the skin underneath. Then a length of chain dropped next to his foot and jangled in the hearth. It wasn't sleigh bells after all. He sat on his heels and stooped forward with a cascading crack of 24 joints. He pushed his face through the hanging stockings, threadbare hat hanging low and strings of white matted hair clinging over his face. He emerged into my living room, short and emaciated, dragging a red burlap sack blackened by soot. Santa? He saw me and stumbled in shock. The face. I couldn't believe it. The deep wrinkles, the wiry beard coated in sediment from infinite chimneys. The shape of it, too. Not jolly and round. No, concave with hanging sallow skin. He cowered away from me like a dog that had been kicked too many times. But I still caught his eyes. Small, impossibly black dots, darting away to look anywhere but back at me. He dragged his chained leg to the tree and began dropping gifts beneath it. Beautifully wrapped gifts. A facade covering the horror I was witnessing. There came a sudden tug on his chain and he moaned in fear, quickening his pace. Then the chain tightened and began reeling him in. He stretched frantically and took cookies in his hand, shoving his whole fist into his mouth, then chugging the milk so fast it streamed over the sides and onto his dirtied suit. A harder tug took his feet out from under him, and he smacked his face onto the carpet. With bewildered black eyes, he finally stared up at me, stretching out his hand. I remember the look he gave me, his whole ghostly visage, trembling in fear, and I can still hear the whimpering as he slid backwards into the fireplace and up the chimney. The whimpering wakes me up every Christmas Eve. I still believe in Santa Claus. I just wish I didn't. Father clapped his hands loudly to silence the noisy house. "Now then," he said, "are all my children ready for bed? Before you scamper off to dream of stockings and sugar plums, Grandmother will tell you a story." The old woman hummed to herself while they gathered on the floor around her rocking chair. Once they grew quiet again, she spoke over the soft crackling of the fireplace. "When I was a girl, there was a tradition of telling scary ghost stories on Christmas Eve, but not this year. This year I'm going to tell you the truth. Would you like that?" Sleepyheads nodded. Grandmother cleared her throat and began to recite a poem. 6 little children all in a row. Which one will be dragged out into the snow? Santa brings gifts, but he takes a gift too. Each year a young tribute, as is his due. He works them to death, making next year's toys. Those we call elves, who were once girls and boys. But Santa weaves magic, and once morning dawns, good children forget the bad one, who's gone. So which of you 6 was the naughtiest tot? Can't hide from Santa, you're sure to be. But Grandma, the smallest girl interrupted, then covered her mouth. "Yes, dear." In a tiny voice, almost a whisper, the girl continued. "There are only 5 of us." Grandmother leaned forward, raised her spectacles, and slowly counted the children around her chair. When her finger reached an empty spot, she stopped. "My goodness, so there are. I'm getting forgetful too." Then she leaned back and began again. 5 little children, all in a row. One big difference between my older twin sister and I is that everyone loved her and neglected me. During our birthdays, relatives always gave her the attention, and would ask why I wasn't as smart or as charming a girl as she. At school, our teachers scolded me for not passing in my homework, which my sister would always throw away after copying my answers. My parents always took her side and punished me brutally when she framed me for anything. I even once overheard them saying they wished they had born only one child. At first, I could take it. I told myself I was a good girl. It was only during Christmas that my patience ran short, as I always received the gifts I asked for from Santa in my letters, only to have them all stolen by my sister in exchange for the coal she always received. My parents would shake their heads, telling me that if I were a good girl, I would have gotten a gift from Santa too. This Christmas Eve, I put an end to it all. For the first time, I received warmth and sympathy from neighbors as they huddled around me, staring up at the house I myself had set fire to. A tall old man in a brown overcoat stood beside me. He looked nothing like in the pictures, but I recognized him once I looked into his kind dark eyes. "Thank heavens," he whispered, pressing a bag wrapped in a green ribbon into my hands. I knew what it was immediately. "I was worried you were being too good for your own good."